This is Fearlessly Fertile. Welcome to the Fearlessly Fertile podcast, special presentation of Fearlessly Fertile True Crime. Loves, I'm so excited to be presenting you with this week's episode because we have Mr. Austin here with us to discuss a case that we've been interested in for years. And so you loved the episode we did with the Laci Peterson case. So we are going to take a close look at the Idaho murder case. For those of you that are not familiar with this case, we're referring to the murder of 4 University of Idaho college students back on November 13th, 2022. We have a special connection to this case from the standpoint that we used to live in Idaho. We've been to Moscow. And as you will hear, there is a fertility twist to this. So welcome back to the podcast, babe. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, love.
Now, to bring all of you up to speed, this is about the murder of 4 University of Idaho college students: Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, and Xana Kernodle. So the girls were all living in the same home at 1122 King Street in Moscow, Idaho. And Ethan Chapin was the boyfriend of Xana Kernodle, one of the women that was living in the home. So that's our basic understanding of this case. So quadruple murder, Moscow, Idaho, November 13th, 2022. But what we're going to be doing is breaking this down even more, giving you some more detail, and then also giving you insight from me as a former prosecutor and my husband with 20 plus years of law enforcement, and give you a little bit of an Austin twist to break down this case. So first and foremost, I also want to make sure that we're really clear. The opinions expressed are solely ours.
You mean I don't tell you your opinion?
What?
I don't tell you what your opinion is?
No.
Oh.
No, never. Never.
Does it go both ways?
I'm always telling you what your opinion is going to be. So we're looking at this from our perspective. We are basing this on research that we've done prior to the case, knowing the area, and just being true crime fans and having deep compassion for the victims and the victim's family in this case. So let's do this, babe. We'll set the stage. On the night of November 12th, 2022, all 4 of these kids, I'm going to refer to them as kids because they all were. I mean, they were between ages 20 and 21, I think, right?
Right.
They were all at different stages of their college careers. I believe Kaylee Gonsalves was getting ready to graduate. She was actually only with her friends for that one more weekend before she was going to be moving off to pursue her marketing career, I believe it was, in Austin, Texas. But the rest of them were continuing students. I think Ethan Chapin was a sophomore, Maddie was a senior, and Xana was, I think, a junior. I'm not sure, but that's basically the spread as far as where they were in their college career. But that night, they had been to an Idaho Vandals game. Is that right?
I believe so. Yeah, they had gone out the Saturday night to the college football game.
They had been doing their normal college partying thing, and they ended up at the Corner Room bar. That was Kaylee and Maddie were at that bar, which was a bar that a lot of the students went to. And they were seen on camera. I think it was a video camera that was collected by a food truck, leaving the bar and grabbing food at about 1 a.m. So at that point, there was some indication that they called a ride share and were taken home to their house on 1122 King Street in Moscow, Idaho. So before we go any further, let's talk about Moscow, Idaho, because we actually know that. I mean, we lived in Idaho for 3 years during COVID, and we actually went up to Moscow to get a Christmas tree.
We did. Yeah, it was a fantastic Christmas tree farm. We had a nice trip. But we have been up to that area. It's in the northern section of Idaho's Panhandle on the border with Washington. You have University of Idaho, and just 10 miles across the border is Washington State. So you have these kind of 2 relatively comparable sized college towns of 15 to 25,000, depending on the time of year, that commingle and share that general area.
So we have University of Idaho in Moscow, and then we have Washington State University in, was it Pullman?
Pullman, Washington.
And so you said that was how far apart?
10, 15 minutes.
Okay. So you have these 2 kind of ecosystems of of students, and then they all kind of probably have some interchange between them. The girls, Kaylee and Maddie, seen getting food from a food truck. They get into a rideshare. They get home approximately 1-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. And from the investigation, the understanding is they went to sleep shortly after that. And all of these people had been drinking. It was a typical Saturday night. Now, we also know that Xana Kernodle and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, had arrived at the house sometime later. And we know that Xana had purchased some food from DoorDash. She had a DoorDash delivery around 4 a.m. And in the house, there were other roommates. So let's break down the way that the house was set up, because it was an unusual design. So it was 3 stories. At the top level, which would be the 3rd floor, there was Maddie's room and there was Kaylee's room. On the 2nd floor, there was Xana's room and Dylan's room. So Dylan was a female, another roommate. And then on the 1st floor, which is kind of, would you say that's the basement, sort of?
No, my understanding is the split level. The primary entry was on the 2nd floor. So once you entered the 2nd floor, you go downstairs, but there was access from the external exterior of the residence into that 1st floor.
Okay, so it wasn't like full on basement. It was just ground floor.
Yes.
So that's the scene. 3 stories. Everyone has their own room. We also know that after the 4 a.m. DoorDash delivery at around 4:12, we know based on the investigation that Xana Kernodle was on social media. We also know that a car was seen on somebody else's camera, on a neighbor's camera, leaving that area, matching the description of what would later be the suspect and convicted murderer, Brian, what's his face?
Kohberger.
His car leaving the area. Our basic time frame for this entire story, ladies, is about 25 minutes. I'm not saying it took 25 minutes. It's just kind of the stamps that we have for time is approximately 25 minutes.
Right.
So from the understanding that we have based on our research and reviewing our sources, so some really great sources, if you guys want to supplement what you're hearing here, Amazon Prime did One Night in Idaho. There's also an incredible ABC 2020 special on the Idaho murders. Highly encourage you to check that out. Basically, the understanding is that Kohberger entered the house on the 2nd floor sometime after the DoorDash delivery. Because think about it. We have all these people in the house. Xana is awake. She gets a delivery at 4 a.m. And then his car is seen leaving the area at 4:17, approximately. The idea is that he entered the house, went upstairs to the bedroom where Maddie and Kaylee were sleeping, and they happened to be in the same bed. These girls were best friends since 6th grade, and everyone describes them as being inseparable. They are like sisters. It was not unusual for after a night of hanging out, they go to bed, fall asleep together. He basically went upstairs to that room and immediately started stabbing them to death. So we also know based on the investigation that it seems like Xana Kernodle, who was in the kitchen area eating whatever she ordered, hears a commotion, starts to make her way upstairs to where Maddie and Kaylee were, and runs into the suspect. And it appears as though he started chasing her back. We don't know that because we don't have any video, but what we do know is she had a ton of defensive wounds. And they find Xana's body in her bedroom next to her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, who I think was sleeping because he was a big guy. And the understanding based on the autopsy and investigation was that he was killed instantly by Brian Kohberger. And this whole time, ladies, Dylan, the other roommate, was in her room and she opened her door 3 times, looks out and sees a man in all black, ski mask, who she describes as having bushy eyebrows. So she got a decent look at him, it seems.
Right. Yeah. So Dylan does hear some commotion. I think at first it's explained that she thought it was the roommates wrestling with the dog and then maybe somebody playing. But yeah, on the 3rd opening of her door, she sees ultimately the convicted killer leaving the residence. Unknown if he saw her, but she was able to describe him as being taller than 5'10", with ski mask, bushy eyebrows, athletic to medium to athletic build.
And it's interesting. We'll break this down more, but basically we have two girls awake at that point. We have Dylan in her room because she hears something. Xana heard something, so she was going to go attend to it. So it's very possible that those two girls, like they saw what was going on at some point. There's no way for us to know exactly, but we had at least two people that were awake around that time. We also understand that 911 was not called until 8 hours later.
Right. Yeah. Dylan tries calling the roommates, and I think through the forensic evidence, you can see between when the food delivery and social media and phone calls were made when things had generally occurred. And I think once Dylan was unable to reach anybody upstairs or Xana in Xana's room, I think she was either able to make contact with Bethany, or she just said, forget it, I'm going to run down there. And she ran down and fell asleep with Bethany. I don't know what the conversation was when she got down there. Maybe she was mistaken on what she saw or heard, and things calmed down for the two of them and they went to sleep.
It's so crazy. I mean, I know that there was a lot of criticism initially, and we're not here to criticize anybody. It's just it is odd behavior, but it also would fall in line with somebody who's traumatized would behave in a way that might not make sense to the outside world. I mean, you would think, oh my gosh, I hear something going on. I hear whimpering, because we also know that there was some indication that somebody heard whimpering and I'm here to help you. This kind of weird, bizarre kind of conversation. Probably you hear something crazy like that, you're going to shut the door, lock it exactly as she said she did.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't our confirmation bias much rather explain that away as somebody's joking and playing, or would it automatically go to 4 people have just been murdered?
Yeah, there's no way of knowing that. But it is kind of odd. I mean, something scared her enough to try to start calling her friends, getting on social media. And in any event, Dylan ends up down in the bedroom with Bethany, falls asleep. And then it's only after they get up and had called their friends, because the other thing is that they didn't call 911 until after they had tried to contact other people, not in the home, outside of the home.
Right.
Because they actually had friends come to the home before law enforcement got there. And this is also probably a generational thing as well, and maybe some naivete on their part, that there's a crime scene up there. But we also know that from the body cam video that I viewed from the ABC special on this, there were cans and red Solo cups all over the house. Now, that doesn't mean that anybody got what they deserved. I mean, like, just because they were drinking doesn't mean that they were wide open to this. There's no way that they could have anticipated that a crazy lunatic would come in wielding a knife to kill a bunch of people. But I think it does explain perhaps some of the time that passed. People were probably drunk or drinking, sleeping late, and then kind of it all comes to a head, in addition to the trauma that they experienced. But let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about, from a law enforcement perspective, when you get a phone call from a girl that's crying saying that something happened, and you're dispatched to a location, like, what's going through your head as an investigator? Because by the time 911 was called, there was a friend that had come to the home, walked upstairs, and saw that something wasn't right.
Yeah, I think that based on what I saw was dispatch provided to the responding officer, unresponsive person or unresponsive female or something like that. So generally speaking, working a patrol car, you'd go, oh, maybe it's a medical call. Somebody had a medical emergency. They've somehow, some way they're unconscious. I don't remember reviewing the dispatch tape and getting any inclination that there was an impending crime scene. I don't remember that being the case.
There were friends that discussed this in interviews afterward, both on the Amazon Prime special as well as the ABC 2020, they were saying that it was a guy and his girlfriend that either Dylan or Bethany called, I don't recall. One of the surviving roommates called them. They came to the house. He walked in, told everyone to stay back or not to come up, and that the police needed to be called because he was the one that actually put eyes on the fact that there were bodies.
Right. Yeah. And so you're going to get to a scene and you're going to go in and, life is the number one priority on a scene. I think they went in and immediately went upstairs and found the Maddie and Kaylee situation and then back down to Xana and her boyfriend, and then continued through the house to make sure there were no other victims and no other suspects. And at that point, obvious signs of death, you may or may not even need medical personnel to come over and make that pronouncement depending on what the situation is. And I don't recall if that's what they did. At this point, several hours had passed. The scene you would be able to tell from the scene without getting graphic what, if it was obvious. You're not going to call in medical professionals to pronounce a death if there's no body temperature.
Wow. And
so then you immediately try and preserve that scene and start gathering up the witnesses and calling out the support, because there's going to be a lot of need.
So what would be going through your head as you're walking upstairs and you kind of get a sense? I don't know if I've ever asked you this. Like, do your spidey senses go off when you were walking up to a house? Like, man, something ain't right here. Like, has that ever happened to you?
No, when I'm around or was around dead bodies, it was very bizarre to me because you expect a certain amount of movement from somebody in the room. And so when you walk into a room and there's just not the natural respiratory cycle, or no fidget, or no shifting, no acknowledgement, no stand up and handshake or anything like that, it gets really weird for me. I think about those things and I go, well, now that's very bizarre. And so when you walk into a room, you may not, I'm not going to go into more graphic details about what you probably would have run into walking into this house. But I imagine there were certain indicators as you walked into the house using a totality of your senses that would indicate to you that something had taken place in there.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah. And then from that point, you're not doing anything until all the support systems are in place. Well,
yeah. I mean, at that point, wouldn't you basically notify everybody, hey, we need CSI over here, or...
Yeah, you're going to, and I can't say for certain, you're looking at Moscow, probably an agency of maybe 25 sworn and 10 administrative and support staff. So they're probably looking at two full-time detectives would be my guess. And they might just be, looking into this case. There hadn't been a homicide in 7 years. So I don't know if they had been a detective during the last homicide. So Wow. They may have never been to a homicide and may have done a basic homicide course, and that would be the case.
That's crazy.
I can't say that for sure. Certain agencies have certain requirements before you can be the lead investigator on a homicide. I can't speak for every agency.
Wow. Well, I mean, but we came from, having been up there, so we know there, there's a little more context about what people were walking into there. Not in the house, but in Moscow overall. this is a small community. When we got our Christmas tree, we stayed at the presidential suite of the best hotel that was there, and it was awful.
Yeah.
It was run down. Like, it's not a particularly built up area. Maybe it is now 3 years later. But it is, I wouldn't say economically depressed, but It's not exactly prosperous.
It's not, Anaheim Police Department in Southern California, where they get a lot of their support from Disneyland, right? They don't have $1 billion corporation in their jurisdiction.
Right.
So they're making do with their budget, and they're meeting the needs of the community. You're looking at one officer per 1,000 people. And that's pretty pretty typical on agencies in cities of that size. So you're not going to need a lot of stuff. But subsequently, to be on a homicide at my primary agency, you had to go homicide investigations, you had to go to officer involved shooting, you had to go to search warrant and interview and interrogation. And then you could be a primary on a homicide. And generally, you shadowed others on homicides prior. You don't have the opportunity to shadow anybody on a homicide prior. I don't know what courses they've received training in. And, experiences vary and everybody's experience has value. But calling in the extra support from Idaho State Patrol and FBI was absolutely necessary here. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they probably figured out they were way in over their head at that point. When you have a quadruple homicide, like that's crazy.
Yeah. And FBI's evidence recovery, ERT evidence recovery team, having watched them work on search warrants and crime scenes, extremely, extremely efficient. And they can expedite evidence. You got DNA, you've got fingerprints, you got photos, things that you need analyzed. They've got the experts for it.
I remember in the very beginning of this investigation, didn't they make some missteps about what they said to the public?
Yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate. Is at one point, I think a day or two, is they said it. They don't have any suspects, but it's an isolated incident, and they don't believe the community is in danger. And it's like, well, you generally reserve that sort of statement once you knew who the suspect was and what the motive was. I mean, this wasn't a domestic violence situation that anybody could pinpoint. As far as everybody could tell from the very, very beginning, it was generally random. So let's talk about the suspect for a minute. So suspect is late 20s, Brian Koberger. He's a PhD student at the Washington State, just 10, 15 minutes over the border into Washington. And he is kind of this oddball, involuntarily celibate sort of looking fellow who
you call it an incel, right?
Incel.
There's a word for that.
Yeah, incel. People who aren't as lucky with the ladies as maybe some quote unquote chads might be. Or, hey, look, the luckiest man alive speaking right now to you live.
Well, but wait a second. So involuntarily celibate. That's a super victim-y. I mean, you can tell there's rage and there's victimhood in that, even that description.
Right.
So basically you're saying there's a group of dudes out there who call themselves incels who don't communicate with women, don't have much luck with women, and you were about to say more about that.
Yeah, and my very basic understanding is that they, like you said, they believe that they're victims and that women should be, in essence, for lack of a better term, provided to them. And this is just a part of the society that is incorrect. And that there is an incel movement. And if you look at incel attacks, you'll see some very violent mass casualty events, whether it be shootings or stabbings. And there's the very first one, and I'm not going to name his name, but he's like a martyr. So when they refer to, or they provide themselves maybe a pseudonym or a handle, they use that martyr's name. And creepy. So they continue to honor him through their actions.
So one freak honors another freak for their freaking
advancing
victimhood.
The incel victimhood. Yeah.
Wow.
So Koberger is this oddball, and he's had difficulties with females in the past. And I think he was on the way out of Washington State from his teacher's assistant position.
Right. He was a PhD candidate and he was on a performance plan, is what my understanding was, because he had some run-ins with some women at the university, and he was doing weird things like blocking their entrance.
Made him feel uncomfortable. And yeah.
Right. So then, okay, so we have that guy in Pullman, 10, 15 minutes away approximately. My understanding based on our research also is that his phone pinged 23 times in that area over a relatively short period of time.
Yeah. So what you're going to use on this case is obviously witness statements, forensic evidence such as DNA, which we'll talk about in a moment. And in other events, you can look at cell phone towers. So at 4 a.m., what cell phones were in the area and what cell phones are ordinarily in the area. So if you ordinarily have 1,000 cell phones in this in this particular quadrant. Were there any that stood out? Another bit of excellent investigation that I don't know who located this video, but a video of a 2011 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra was seen fleeing the area at a high rate of speed at some 4:17 in the morning.
That was a neighbor's camera that caught that. And I think what was interesting about that is that's how they got some of the description. And then it was Washington State University had made the decision to go back and see who was registered there. Yeah.
So campus police. So you have this vehicle, and I don't know if that was probably found on a neighborhood canvas, and that information is ultimately disseminated a couple weeks after the event. I believe campus police at Washington State said, well, let's see if anybody on campus drives a 2011 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra. And there was, and a person named Brian Koberger was the registered owner and the driver of the vehicle that got stopped twice and was viewed on body cam by campus police. And campus police forwarded that information over to investigators in Moscow. And you have a white male subject, over 5'10" with a athletic, medium build with bushy eyebrows. And so now they have, okay, well, let's look at his cell phone. And what his cell phone showed, like you said, was he had been in the area of the residence almost 24 times in the course of the month prior. And at some points, he had started that direction, I believe, turned his phone off, and then returned home in Washington and turned his phone back on, which is exactly the same thing that happened the night of the murders.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so then that actually brings us to the point of the investigation when they're starting to look around, and where they found a very key piece of evidence which is interesting, because for those of you listening, you may not know that he was actually, he was trying to get a PhD in criminal justice. So this is a guy that was studying crime. I mean, knee deep in crime all the time. He was studying the psychology of criminals. Like, he was all up in it, but he made one critical and crucial mistake, luckily for the victims.
Right. When this happened and we heard that there were 4 victims with knife wounds, I immediately said that he had to use a high grade combat style knife that wasn't going to break, because frequently kitchen knives and pocket knives will break during a stabbing event. And to stab one person and have it break is one thing, but to stab 4 people and not leave the knife behind, or a piece of the knife behind, told me that it was a probably, and I told you at the time, probably a K-bar.
That was my husband. He's like, white male K-bar.
Yeah. In some way, he either lost, dropped, left behind, forgot, whatever, the sheath to that knife, and left it on the bed next to Kaylee and Maddie.
Well, and that's where they got the DNA, because they found like one minuscule bit of DNA on the button, that closure of the flap. You stick the knife in the sheath and the leather. The
leather strap just as a 1-button snap to hold that retention there.
And it was from that they got DNA.
Right.
But when they ran that DNA, it didn't have a hit.
No. So now what you're going to do nowadays is you're going to look at public databases to see if there is a familial connection with that DNA. And between about that time, identifying Brian Koberger as a potential suspect in the form of his description, his cell phone, and his vehicle, coupled with that little bit of DNA, they were able to do a trash pull from his parents' house in Pennsylvania. And a trash pull is once you put your trash out on the curb, it's free game.
It's abandoned property.
Cops routinely go out there and just grab a bunch of stuff, or will follow people until they go to a restaurant or throw a cigarette butt out the window, and we'll stop and put our gloves on and put it in a Ziploc bag, and we'll run it to the lab immediately.
Just take note, ladies. If you're intending to commit some kind of offense, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in your trash.
Right. Or your neighbor's trash, because I think at some point he was throwing things away in the neighbor's trash when he was ultimately arrested.
Well, and so the other funny thing about this in the link to Pennsylvania is he had actually called his parents or something like that, and his dad came out from Pennsylvania, and they drove back to Pennsylvania from Washington
for
together.
Christmas break. Yeah. So the dad flies out and they link up, and they drive that white Elantra from Washington back to Pennsylvania. And it 2 times, I believe, on that trip, they were traffic stopped by law enforcement as what we refer to as a wall stop. Just find a lawful reason to stop them, make the contact, write the citation, or provide the warning, and move on. Perhaps you can gain some evidence of that. Perhaps you throw the attempt to make the first traffic stop and the guy immediately runs, and then you've got a reason to bring him into jail for simply, evading law enforcement.
Well, and at that point you can get a DNA.
Right.
Wow. That's interesting. So he leaves the sheath to the knife either on the nightstand, on the bed, somewhere around there.
Right. In the first bedroom.
That's when they know who they're dealing with. And this is 47 days deep before they make an arrest, right? So this happened November 13th, and it isn't until December.
Right.
Something
in between Christmas and New Year's, I think, or right before Christmas, that they have confirmed the link in the DNA, and that's enough to pull him in and extradite him from Pennsylvania back to Idaho.
Wow. You have to ask yourself, okay, so this guy has all this education, all of this experience. Like, how do you make a move like that? It worked out for the victims, and thank goodness for that. But I think it would be great if you would comment a little bit about having interviewed people, having been on the scenes, like the act of stabbing people. That's not an easy thing to do.
Right. Yeah. So there are, certain responses. Having known what I've gone through and seen people go through, is that you get an adrenaline dump from an event, whatever that event is. People get adrenaline from maybe skydiving or a spider running into the room, like my wife. And all of a sudden your vision may go tunneled. You may have auditory exclusion where you lose your hearing. Your breathing might be interrupted. You might be holding your breath. And I mean, could you imagine shadow boxing for a solid minute with a knife in your hand, fighting somebody on the other end of that while holding your breath? So there are some very primal things that are cared for first and foremost in the details that might truly be within what you're looking at, but outside of the scope of what you can see. If I'm looking directly at the camera and I can see you on the right side of my hand through my peripheral vision, but in a high stress situation, you would be completely omitted from my vision right now. And he drops the sheath. I would love to know when you realize that.
Oh, yeah. He probably was like, holy shit.
Well, there was the one individual on the Facebook group that said they probably found DNA on the sheath, and that information had not been released. And that handle was the nod to the martyr, the incel martyr.
Right. Well, so that is something that the ladies might not know, is that he was kind of hanging, or somebody saying that they were Brian Koberger, or some handle that was related to this incel movement that had a profile of this guy's face. It looked very similar, because I think that profile was later deleted. I think there was also an alleged profile that he had on Instagram, and he had liked one of the girls' photos or something. I think it was either Kaylee or Maddie's photos. Right. I don't remember. There's no clear indication that he had any direct relationship with anyone in that house.
Yeah, but there have been plenty of cases that are documented where somebody with an issue gets fixated on somebody completely unknown to them and fantasizes about different parts of it, and maybe can't bring themselves to move forward to try and make a connection, a human connection. So they just need to excise that connection from themselves by physical violence and death.
That's so crazy. That is really insane. I mean, and it's interesting because he may not have known the whole layout of that house anyway. He may have not even known that there was a bedroom tucked where Bethany was. And
I think he did. I think he had been over there enough times to have a general understanding of probably looking through the windows, because there had been one of the roommates that said they had seen somebody outside at one point.
Oh.
He may have tried to make entry before. He may have made entry before and decided to exit. We don't know. But I believe because he did immediately go upstairs.
So he knew to go up there, but he may not have known to go downstairs where Bethany was. Because,
or she was never an intended target.
Right. Well, so going back to that question that I had about, him being exhausted, I mean, that could explain also why he didn't go any farther going to try to kill Dylan, or if he knew Bethany was there, that he didn't bother to kill her. Because at that point, if he's killed Maddie, he's killed Kaylee, he's killed Xana
and then
who was fighting
Ethan.
him. And then Ethan, I mean, so he was in a full-on knockdown, drag-out fight with Xana. I think that's how we know that he probably would have been exhausted, because
he may have intended to go kill one and ended up buying two. And then on the way out, 3 and 4, which was way deeper than he wanted to be. And he turns around and sees number 5, and he doesn't know if it's 5, 6, and 7 behind that door.
Right. Well, and it may have surprised him that there was a dude there, because Ethan Chapin was asleep in Xana's bed, his girlfriend's bed. Well, which is kind of a side note, because I alluded to this in the very beginning, that this sort of fertility connection, Ethan Chapin was one of the 3 triplets that the Chapin family had, and the Chapins had IVF babies. So all 3 of those, the triplets, were born as a result of IVF. And it's just heartbreaking to see, because these triplets were inseparable. It's heartbreaking. And
yeah, there were siblings that showed up to the scene when law enforcement was there. Parents that showed up to the scene when law enforcement was there. So yeah, you have 4 families effectively subtracted from in a matter of 10 minutes, is probably what it was.
When you think about that timeline, though, that's a lot. Like, he was moving quickly, and he was like, if we say that we know Xana was on social media at 4:12, delivery at 4 a.m. from DoorDash or whoever it was, I mean, that's quick.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a stab is just as fast as a punch. And it 1, 2, 3 can happen very quickly. And it doesn't, in certain cases, in Ethan's case, it didn't take much. And somebody who's fighting, it's going to take a little bit more.
Well, because he stabbed them a lot.
Yeah.
Like, without going into the gory details.
A significant blade, and an 8 to 9 inch fixed steel shank blade that doesn't break. And it causes deep penetrating wounds. And it doesn't take much from that point. So yeah, he eliminated 4 lives in a matter of probably 1 minute per life, roughly.
It's crazy.
And you have decades of love and building and growth, and all of that for all those families that was just destroyed by the suspect. And some of those families really dove in head first, and they were going to get the justice that was owed, and if they had to do it themselves, and it's wonderful for them. There were other families that decided to go, what, he's not getting another minute of our time. That chapter of our life is going to be honored with our present family.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that stood out for me a lot when I was reviewing and preparing for this case, because the Gonzalez family was on it. Like, Olivia Gonzalez, which is Kaylee's older sister, I believe, was like immediately diving in and looking for social media connections and trying to find video. Like, I think that's one of the most extraordinary things for people to take away from this, is that while law enforcement does their best, they're human, and you got to get involved.
A scene like that is going to take at least, 24 hours to 48 hours to process. And you're probably not jumping on a lot of leads immediately. It sounds like she grabbed Kaylee's phone.
Yeah, she grabbed Kaylee's phone.
Was in contact with the rideshare driver and got his information and got his statement, and then provided that to law enforcement. And that's incredible. And if there's one thing that we should all remember, is we can't rely on government to fix all of our problems at all the time.
Well, yeah, exactly. And you have no idea who's investigating your case. I mean, you may have Joe Shit the Ragman, who has not been to a homicide case, has no freaking clue. I mean,
there's plenty of events where, cop spends 30 years grinding for his entire life. And then all of a sudden he's a week toward retirement and something kicks off and he turns around and goes, not today, boys. And doesn't take action. And that's a tough place to be.
Well, especially in a small state like Idaho, where there tends to be like not a ton of resources directed to education, and how I know personally from my experience and in my opinion, they don't give enough credit to people coming from other agencies who have more information, a lot to offer. I think there tends to be that small town attitude about.
They're rather insular, and that can be incredibly damaging if you're not willing to open up your view and accept and learn and ask for that help, and encourage that reaching out. It doesn't advance much.
No, not at all. And when you have people coming in, I mean, there's a ton of people from California that come into Idaho and neighboring states with decades of very specialized training and have a lot to offer the community. But when you're dealing with somebody who's just from that area and doesn't know anything other than that, it can be very threatening. But luckily in Moscow, they could see very quickly that they were out of their depth and were willing to take in expertise and advance the investigation as much as they could with the help of outside agencies.
Yeah. And that was absolutely the right thing to do. You don't keep a case like that in-house, and you get the help you can get as fast as you can get it. Yeah.
So I think when we take a look at this case and really look at what it means for us now, like what we can take from this is there's no way that any of these young people could have possibly protected themselves.
Nothing they could have done. No, locks keep honest people honest. And he had been stalking one or more of them and planning this and rehearsing and fantasizing. And we say, it's easy for us to say, we can't find a connection and a relationship between the victims and the suspect or the killer. He may have an incredible relationship with them in his own mind.
Right. Well, and, some people have thrown shade on this a little bit by saying, that was the party house, but we don't have any indication other than the fact that they left their doors unlocked. But it is, again, Idaho. That's not some place where I think we found that shocking when we moved to Idaho, that people were mellow. Nobody was particularly worried about crime. But with an influx of people coming from bigger states, bigger cities, you're going to get that kind of thing coming into the area.
Yeah, more people move in, you got to deal with more sewage, right?
Yeah, this is true. Well, and from my experience as a prosecutor, I mean, that was like the number one thing. Ladies, frickin' lock your doors and windows. I don't care how nice it is outside. Don't make it easy. How many cases did
you find where it's just like, unlocked window, sexual assault, unlocked door, sexual assault?
It was so many times I just shook my head. I mean, that it's like, I understand the impulse that you think you live in a safe area. And I'm not suggesting anybody live in fear. There's a huge difference between being vigilant about your own safety and living in abject terror. I don't think that's where you want to be.
Right.
But the reality is that, look, not everybody in your neighborhood, as much as you may think you know them, I mean, there's a lot of psychos out there. Yes. And a lot of people with mental illness, and just don't make it easy.
Yeah. And mental illness develops for different reasons. So mental illness, and maybe what we would view as mental illness may not be an illness. It may be drug induced.
Yeah. Well, we know he was a heroin user as well for a period of time in his life.
Yeah. But I have gone to suicide scenes where the people are like, absolutely not. No reason, sitting on the couch. Everything's fantastic. We're watching a movie, cuddled up together. Says, I got to go use the restroom, gets up and tries to kill himself.
That's crazy.
And then, wakes up 2 weeks later and says, no way, I tried to kill myself. Yeah. So, but he did start 4 new medicines for blood pressure, heart, cholesterol, and whatever.
Careful about those meds, ladies. They don't always tell you all the side effects.
Yeah. So, while we might ordinarily think of something as a mental health issue, may have been drug induced.
Yeah. And when we say drug, that doesn't even mean narcotics.
No.
It could be,
prescription drug.
We have known people who are just on regular prescription drugs who have had crazy thoughts.
Yes.
As the result of that. And we're not excusing what this dude did, and we don't have any indication.
No.
But there's there's a lot of complex
It's just a matter of be aware of the people that are around you. You're like you were saying, your neighbor, great person one day, and all of a sudden he takes 4 new meds and all of a sudden he's homicidal.
Yeah. I mean, that's insane. It's interesting because one of the things that we know about that scene is they didn't take that house down for at least a year and a half.
So the house belonged to the college, right?
Right. I think the college, or it was on college property. I think I don't remember exactly how it went down, but they finally tore that house down in December of 2024.
Right.
So, and they also probably kept it up in anticipation of a trial, just in case there was any additional evidence that they needed.
We've done jury walkthroughs.
Yeah.
And you take, a decade later, take an entire jury and the alternates, and take 16 to 24 people in a Bluebird bus out to a crime scene, and everybody gets to stand there and look, and the prosecutor goes, I think he shot him from the bush over there, and the defense goes, that bush wasn't there. That was, that bush just got planted, and everybody walks around the scene and they go back.
Yeah. I mean, typically in a criminal investigation involving a homicide of this magnitude, you would keep the crime scene in place for as long as possible in case there was any issue, because the defendant has a right to a trial and a fair trial. So you would want to make sure that evidence was preserved. If there's any questions later on, that you did the best that you could to preserve that crime scene, or else the defense is going to try to tear you apart and say that this evidence was collected poorly. They want to go back and retest something. They want to take pictures. Funny that didn't happen with Charlie Kirk, though. They immediately after that, there wasn't even an investigation. It was just immediately taken down. But
in the death penalty case, you generally try and preserve and double whatever you're doing. Because remember, as soon as a suspect is arrested, his rights go through the roof. So you have to double down. In California, a death penalty case, they got 2 defense attorneys. They didn't get their 1 assigned. They got 2 assigned.
And that process is going to take at least 20 years,
right,
with appeals and all that stuff. We saw that in Scott Peterson.
So you want to make sure these cases are investigated thoroughly and preserved as long as possible. And I get,
preserve the crime scene.
There's a delicate balance with
reasonable investigation.
Yeah. Hey, look, we preserved it for a year and a half. It's, it's going to go to trial, but we've documented it. I think they served multiple search warrants on that residence. It wasn't the next day that they tore the house down.
Yeah. Strangely, like some stuff that we've seen recently. That's another rabbit hole you can go down, ladies. You think critically about this. I know. There we go. Tinfoil.
Did you get that out? Did you get that out? You feel better?
I got it out. But as critical thinking people and people in law enforcement, we know when something is really freaking off. And with all the things that people were initially criticizing about the Idaho murder cases, we see in this that generally speaking, it was a pretty straightforward.
Well, it's not the investigator's obligation to explain anything to people that are asking questions. They have to fulfill an obligation to the victim first and arrest that perpetrator. And then they have to fulfill the obligation to get that perpetrator through the justice system as best as possible.
And the justice system is for the people of that state as well. So,
right. So when there are questions being asked, they might be wholly reasonable and appropriate and absolutely necessary. Law enforcement has a focus.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to ask yourself in any serious case why they would want to break things down and shove them off to the side quickly if there's a real investigation going on. And I think here that was the case. And so luckily, the families are, to the best degree that they can, having justice. But I think the greatest justice for all of them is their peace, because I don't believe that you're going to necessarily get justice from the system.
No.
The system is one step in having justice. I think the best justice is that family going on to live vibrant lives, to go on and do meaningful things. And I think each one of the families has gone on to do some really amazing things in the names of the victims in this case.
Yeah. And I certainly don't know any of these individuals, but I being close to different moments in my life of going, the only way to honor something for my family would be to live big and not think about that one last minute of my life. Think about the X amount of years and all those minutes made up the composition of the person and the great memories. And so these families, I think we do these to honor the victims and the families and to really acknowledge them, because, from the time a suspect is named, that's all you hear. You don't hear about the brothers and the sisters and the moms and dads and the husbands and wives and the children that are left behind that often. And I would much rather I don't the gory details and the disgusting maniac that is the convicted don't deserve the breath we speak. We really do this to honor and think about and acknowledge the survivors of these events.
Yeah. And luckily, when you take a look at how long these cases typically take to wrap up, I mean, this was a relatively short length of time. They passed away and were murdered in 2022, November 2022. And by, I believe it was July of this year, he entered his own plea.
He was convicted in the plea, which wiped the death penalty off the table, and he took 4 consecutive life sentences. And maybe he'll, have a miserable time in prison.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Let's hope. Closing this out, I think you made a really great point, babe, is that, aside from the fertility connection with the Chapin family, I mean, all of these children are really wanted. And you think about the pain that the families are going through. It's incredible how resilient these families can be, but it's also a lesson on how precious life is and how you just got to keep going. There's one really amazing piece of good news to leave this on. Kaylee Gonzalez, her sister Olivia, that was such a massive force behind seeking justice for all 4 of these young people. She had a baby, and she delivered that baby in room 1113. So on the day of her sister's murder, November 13th, that just kind of these little signs of grace, I think,
right.
Little bits of things that she gives birth to her baby girl, a daughter named after her
sister.
Was born in room 11.
And sometimes
13.
Looking for these little acknowledgments of the universe or of God, or however you want to view these things, as a nod from the other side is special. And I think it's a love that we keep in our heart to look out for those things.
Yeah.
And then when we see them, and it brings something back to us.
I think there was also the time of her birth. Not only was it room 1113 of this baby girl's birth, but I think it was the actual time, 4 a.m.
Wow.
And I would encourage all of you to go watch the ABC 2020 special, because Olivia Gonzalez talks about that and how she just saw signs of Maddie and her sister Kaylee like everywhere in that process. In these kinds of things, it seems really dark, but I think that, as in everything, there's a silver lining. There is going to be a way to find the good in everything. That I think here we have exposing this bizarre incel movement. I think we also get more educated about our personal safety and how we can be more aware. And then also just a re-emphasis of the appreciation for life, and to remember that people that we talk about here aren't just characters. That was somebody's baby at some point.
Yep.
So I'm so glad you came on, babe. I love these conversations.
I love you.
Yeah, I love you. And that is another Fearlessly Fertile True Crime Special. See you next time. Change your mindset. Change your results.
Love this episode of the Fearlessly Fertile podcast? Subscribe now and leave an awesome review. Remember, the desire in your heart to be a mom is there because it was meant for you. When it comes to your dreams, keep saying hell yes.